what is going on, ladies and gentlemen? It is me, R3D2, and I'm back for a new awesome Star Wars lore video. So, in this video, I'm going to be discussing the ultimate Star Wars Imperial fleet. Now, I'm going to be using ships from non-canon, so this is not necessarily something you can see in the movies unless they recanonize the ships. So, the main problem with most Imperial fleets is mostly it consists of a few Imperial Star Destroyers and maybe some light cruisers and some TIE fighters. This is not necessarily a terrible strategy, but it was also but at the same time, it was not very good against Rebel ships and fleets because they were composed mainly of X-Wings and other small fighters, which could easily slip past the Imperial Star Destroyer's defenses, as well as easily outgun and destroy the TIE fighters, as well as the light cruisers. So the Empire didn't have a lot of flexibility in its fleets. So what I'm about to show you is the ultimate Imperial fleet that I think could have helped the Empire win the Galactic Civil War. For the first part of my fleet, I'm going to do simply Imperial Star Destroyers, because they are, of course, the best, the all-around ship. They're the ship the Empire used the most, but the other ships I'm going to add to this fleet are going to help reinforce that. You know how Star Destroyers are. They're mostly their turbo lasers and ion cannons are good anti-ship, and I think that they would be a good addition to the fleet. Now, number 2, Lancer frigates. Lancer frigates are light anti-fighter ships. They were covered in anti-fighter cannons, and they were also, most people say they were fast, others say they weren't very fast. I'm going to go with the majority and say that they were fast. They were very fast, excellent anti-fighter ships, and I think they would be another great addition to the fleet. They would help cover the Star Destroyer's weakness and unable to counter starfighters, and they would also be good for recon, such as going into and patrolling smaller areas before the main fleet moves in. The Lancers themselves, they were never widely used. They were mostly used for unknown regions and wild space patrols by the Empire, because the Star Destroyers were more suited towards the Tarkin Doctrine, which was the main governmental body, or the main governmental philosophy of the Galactic Empire. Next up, we have interdictors. Interdictors were the Empire's weapon of choice for preventing enemy ships from jumping to light speed and escaping. That was a big problem, that most enemy ships for the Empire escaped. So the Empire had to use interdictors to keep them from running away. I think that I should keep 2 interdictors in this fleet so that they could help keep enemy fleets from running away, and the interdictor would be more behind the formation so that they could be more protected, as interdictors were not necessarily combat ships and had no decent offensive weapons. Now we move on to carriers. For my carriers, I'm going to use Venator Star Destroyers. Venators were basically cast aside after the Clone Wars because of their lack of offensive power, as compared to a Star Destroyer, of course. Venators actually did have a decent amount of turbo laser and laser cannons, but compared to the Star Destroyer, again, they were rather obsolete when compared with the Star Destroyer. However, they have much more carrying capacity than a Star Destroyer, meaning that I would use the Star Destroyers as my front line warships, and the Venators would be my support fighter carriers, and also as well as bombers and landing craft or assault ships for landing on a planet's surface should I decide to conquer a planet. I believe that Venators were underused, and I think that they should be more used in Imperial fleets, and I thought that they would be a good addition to this fleet because of their carrying capacity and decent ability to protect themselves. I also positioned them back here so they would be able to protect the interdictors, as well as keep their fighters able to deploy and have the fighters backwards so they wouldn't get destroyed the second they came out of the hangars. Next, we're going to talk about my other support craft. I'm going to use Victory Star Destroyers. They're not as powerful as the Star Destroyer, the regular Star Destroyer, but they are smaller, faster, more maneuverable, and if they can be called that, and still have a decent amount of firepower. They were actually the ships that ended up replacing the Venator cruiser before the Star Destroyers were widely spread, and the victory ships the victories were actually planned to replace the Venators during the Clone Wars. Then the Empire rose, and then a more emphasis was put on size as opposed to actual carrying capacity. The the Victory Star Destroyer has the same basic problem as the regular Star Destroyer. It has no anti-fighter weapons, but again, that's covered by the Lancer frigates surrounding them. Now, before we move on to my flagship, I would like to talk a little about the fighters of my fleet. The fighters of my fleet, I'm going to be standard. I'm going to be using the TIE Defender. The TIE Defender was an all-purpose combat fighter that was equipped with heavy cannons, ion cannons, missile launchers, and was faster than the Rebel A-Wing. So it was a very powerful combat ship, but it was very underused due to how expensive it was. Considering what the flagship of the fleet is, I'm pretty sure this whole fleet spares no expense. And finally, the flagship of the fleet, I'm pretty sure many of you recognize it from its shape, is the Eclipse II class Star Destroyer. This thing is an absolute beast. It's covered in laser cannons, turbo lasers, ion cannons, and even has a Death Star super laser on the front. Now, the super laser is not nearly as powerful as the Death Star. It cannot destroy an entire planet, but it can destroy large space stations and capital ships with ease. And besides the fact that I left the front of the ship open and it can fire the super laser straight through means that the whole fleet emerges from light speed. Ships can't run away because of the interdictors, and we just blow them out of the sky with the Eclipse. And then when all the big ships are gone, I send in the other ships. They destroy everything in place. The Eclipse is also large and very intimidating, meaning that most ships will simply run away or try to run away before even trying to engage it. And the Eclipse 2 in particular was more powerful than the Eclipse 1. Both of them were intended to be flagships for Emperor Palpatine until he died at Endor, or as people so believed. The Eclipse in Legends, the Eclipse was taken over by the Zon Consortium over the Kuat shipyards after the Battle of Endor, but they abandoned it after taking the locations of the Emperor's vaults. It was eventually reclaimed by the Empire and used in several battles until R3D2 made both the Eclipse and the Eclipse 2 in particular, R2D2 made the ship crash into the planet Abyss, which was the end of the Eclipse program. After that, there was anything to say about the Eclipse. But it was a very powerful ship, and if it weren't for R2D2, that ship would have absolutely torn apart the New Republic, which is why I'm going to make it my flagship. So what do you guys think of the Ultimate Fleet? Do you think did it live up to your expectations, or was there a ship that I left out? If I left out a ship that you thought should have been in there, or if I used or overpraised a particular ship, leave that in the comments down below, and leave up your lineup for the Ultimate Fleet in the comments. I'm very interested to hear your thoughts. I'll see you guys in the next lore video.